One of the things I get asked quite a bit is, how do I avoid the resume black hole? The reality is that in a job search, employers and recruiters receive an enormous number of resumes to consider. Online resume databases are packed with tens of thousands of resumes. How will your resume stand out? Following are some crucial tips about how to consider the role of the resume and some very basic steps to creating a winning resume. These tips are tips that I've taken from other resources, hiring managers, recruiters, but also personal tips from my time as a recruiter and as a hiring manager. So let's get started. Tip number one. You have to remember that the resume really isn't about you. Yes, you're writing your information, like education, experience, skill set, etc. But you should do so with the idea that you want to provide a future employer with important clues about what you have to offer them. So yes, provide all of the usual traditional content, but do so from an employer-centered focus. In other words, let them know how you have the ability to meet their needs and solve their problems. To do so, you must know your audience and their needs. This means you have to do some research in advance. This is also the case even if someone has referred you to a job or someone has said, oh, I'll run your resume to a hiring manager or a manager. You need to prepare your resume in a method that says, I get it. You want to know what I can do for you. Tip number two is in line with tip number one. Present your skills and qualifications in a way that makes you relevant to a future employer. Your qualifications are the baseline, but don't necessarily distinguish you from the competition. So instead, present your achievements in terms of results and benefits to your past employers. In other words, how have you helped past employers succeed? Continually ask yourself if your achievements, as you've noted them on your resume, how do these impact the employer in a positive way? If you are able to quantify this information, even better, do so. If not, that's okay, but just make sure that you emphasize the results and benefits of your achievements for your employer. Again, your qualification and skills are of no value unless you know how to highlight them as they benefit the organization that you're applying for. So think like an employer and create a document as an applicant that highlights essential qualifications that align with the industry and or position and tells the story of how you are prepared for this role. On average, a resume is reviewed about 45 seconds before it's chucked. That's really a very little amount of time to stand out. Therefore, you must work to highlight the most impressive elements. Providing too much information risks drowning out the important aspects of your skills and experience. In other words, let me tell you all the things. And too little information doesn't convince the reviewer that you have the skills and experience that they need. It's a fine balance. Let's quickly cover format. First, be consistent with your format. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a resume where it wasn't clear to me what was going on because it wasn't consistent with the formatting. A hiring manager or recruiter does not have the time to try and figure out what's going on with your resume. So again, consistent with your formatting. It helps guide the reviewer's eyes to the information they need to see. Feel free to use templates. I'm not against templates. They can be helpful in getting you started. But don't feel that you have to fully follow a template to a T. Use the template as a starting guide. However, template or not, the name of the organization, your role in that organization, and date ranges should all use the same format on your resume. So if you use, for example, bolded Times New Roman for the name of the organization, italics Times New Roman for your role and date range, then that should be the case for all of the organizations, all of your roles, and all of the date ranges listed for that particular resume. Font size should be 11 to 12 point font. Again, preferably a professional font like Times New Roman or Arial. Margins should be no less than half of an inch and no more than an inch. Less or more than that starts to look a little odd in the formatting. Still continuing with formatting, your resume can have delineated sections that highlight your skills. These are sections like education and experience. I like to have a specific delineated section, relevant skills. In your case, because you're a student, probably just starting out in your career, I like to have it education first, relevant skills, and experience following. This is, of course, if you're using a reverse chronological resume. There are other templates which we'll cover in another lecture. Unlike the UCD Career and Internship Center advice, I don't suggest using an objective on a resume. This is probably the only area where we disagree. Why do I not suggest using an objective on a resume? I believe that this eats up valuable space on the resume, and this information should really be covered in detail in a cover letter instead. Professionals tend to agree with me as well on this one. The objective on a resume is considered a bit old-fashioned. Now, I also recommend that you use bold and italics and bullets to accentuate, but do so sparingly and consistently. Be careful with using too many types of accents or formatting, as these can read as gibberish when resumes are run through a resume reading software. Also, make sure that you leave out first-person point of view. Avoid me, my, I, we, our, etc. Moving on to content of the resume, I like the STAR method because it keeps things simple. The STAR method can help craft your content for your experience sections. STAR stands for situation, tasks, actions, results. And I like STAR for this method because it forces you to think about how your experience can benefit an employer. So beneath each experience entry, include an accomplishment statement. Begin each statement with an action verb, such as managed a team of 5 students, or created a new programming language, or led to innovative revamps, etc. And highlight the most salient points of your past position. I know this is a difficult part of the resume writing process. For this reason, I highly suggest reading the information provided to you from the Internship and Career Center to ensure you have crafted well-worded and impactful accomplishment statements for each experience entry of your resume. Here's an example of how to transform a position description into an effective accomplishment statement. So before, it notes, served as treasurer for my fraternity. You think, well, what's wrong with that statement? Well, this only identifies the role that you were in. It also uses first person, my fraternity. It also does not explain what you actually did in the role and whether or not you were effective or how you impacted the organization with this accomplishment. The reader is left to decipher whether or not you were effective. Most employers really won't risk moving forward with a resume that only provides role information. Again, can't tell you the many times I've seen resumes that only give us information about their role. The transformed statement at the bottom maintained accurate account of income and expenditures for 150 member chapter, allocated funds to projects and activities within budgetary constraints, increased fundraising for philanthropic ventures by 20%. See the difference? Through this revision, we are able to descriptively break down the role and, most importantly, provide information on our unique contributions in that role. Again, STAR: situation, tasks, action, results. Through this, our impact is clear, descriptive, and verifiable. In other words, I can verify, yes, in fact, when you maintained accurate accounts of income and expenditures, it was a 150 member chapter. And yes, I can verify that you helped increase fundraising by 20%. Strong resumes are consistent and accurate. They also avoid slang and abbreviations. The reason for this is not that we don't assume people in your industry know the abbreviations in that industry, but very often a resume is run through a software resume program who will not necessarily understand the abbreviations, or a resume is run through the human resources department who may not necessarily be up to date on the abbreviations that, say, the auditing department is now using. Always check spelling and grammar. This document represents you and introduces you to a potential employer. If you don't care enough about a document that does this, what kind of work will you provide an employer? So it doesn't hurt to have a friend that you trust, a roommate, or visit our internship and career center for additional read-throughs and assistance. Some additional points. Make sure that your email address is professional. It provides information about you. Again, always think of how you are branding yourself for a potential employer. When possible, describe the work in the same terminology as the employer does. Don't assume that they'll know what you're talking about and assume that things are the same. Again, very often these are run through a resume software program that, again, does not know what you're talking about, does not recognize these things as the same. And again, an assistant in human resources who also doesn't necessarily have a full understanding of the job, but instead is working on a description, from a description provided to them by the hiring unit or manager. So if you use different terminology to describe the same thing, that HR assistant may not recognize that and check your resume into the black hole. Again, they'll go off what's listed on the description and not be able to discern the differences in the verbiage that may be used. Well, thank you. Here's a starting point only. I hope again that you take note of the other lectures and the readings to get started on your own resume. And if you already have a resume, that it may help you improve your resume, especially when it comes to presentation and the accomplishment statements. Until next time.